Anna and I haven't met before, but if there's anyone else called Anna in the room, I hope you got the memo about the royal blue uniform. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. So as Anna said, you're getting two for the price of one this afternoon. Myself and my colleague Anne-Marie McGauran are going to talk a little bit about the work that we've been doing over the last year or so in the Child Poverty and Wellbeing Office. And actually, it's been a really valuable opportunity for us to reflect on the past year, coming at it from slightly different perspectives, and there'll be lots of other perspectives too, but I suppose you're getting a sense of our internal reflections, so apologies about that. But hopefully it's useful in terms of all of our thinking about how we bring about change in the lives of children and families, which is ultimately what we're all about. So we're going to treat the next 30 minutes, maybe we'll talk a little bit faster given that we're a little bit over time, to think a bit about child poverty itself and why it's complex and what that might mean as a policy challenge, but also then what is the role of something like the Department of Taoiseach in a challenge like this, because it is a new initiative, and then some of the lessons that we've learned so far. Now, when I say we are going to talk about child poverty and how that's complex, Anne-Marie, you might... what I mean is you are. So hopefully this will work. We do have an on-screen question, which you should be able to log into with your phones. I say that knowing the mobile phone reception in this room is not great. So we'll see if it works. Maybe it won't work, but it's worth a try. Okay. So if you go to slido.com and put in the code 78888748, or I don't know if the QR code will work from where you're sitting, but slido.com, and the code is 78888748. There is a prize for the person who gets there first. And what we're asking you, maybe just initial reactions, in what ways do you think that child poverty manifests across society? And we've had a really, really rich conversation already today, and I think it's come up in lots and lots of ways. But interested from your experience and where you're at and your expertise and the children and families that you're engaging with. I think we're seeing some of those themes that we have been talking about today, in terms of overrepresentation, perhaps in children's services, low incomes, the pressure that creates around food and other abilities, social stigma, again really important in terms of children's experiences, and linked to many of the other factors that we're seeing there around intergenerational patterns and educational attainment and self-esteem. I think we can probably go on for a while, right, with this exercise, because child poverty is an incredibly complex phenomenon, and we've lots of ways of describing tricky problems and wicked problems and extra tricky problems, and squishy problems was a new one on me recently. And I think this framework is an interesting one to think about these types of challenges, and there's lots of different perspectives on child poverty and child well-being, but there's also lots of different ways, variables that manifests. And so undoubtedly, it's a wicked problem or a messy problem or a complex one. And in fact, talking about it as a problem or a messy problem doesn't really help either, because actually when you dig into it, it's a myriad of wicked problems and it's a myriad of complex problems, and some of them are really complicated and contested and difficult, like what do we do about homelessness, or the situation facing people who are working in poor or community infrastructure. Other things are maybe less difficult in the sense that we know what to do about them, but we are still struggling to resolve them, whether that's making sure the data and the research is doing what we need to do, or dealing with the costs of education, or indeed preschool. And across all of those areas, we see policy solutions emerge, but we remain with these kind of very challenging realities. And according to the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development in Europe, you get action at the centre of government in something like the Taoiseach's office when you're dealing with these types of problems. And actually, I think it's because child poverty was one of these things that was so complex and bouncing around the system that was one of the reasons, certainly, why the proposal to establish a Child Poverty and Wellbeing Programme office emerged. So how do you eat an elephant? Well, what all of us do every day is we try to break down some of these complexities into their constituent parts. We design programs, we collect evidence about why those programs work, we seek to implement them, we try to get the funding to implement them, we start pilots, then we try to mainstream the pilots, all of the things that we've been talking about today. And really that goes to the heart of, I mean, as civil servants, that's what we do, right? It's a core part of our job. Define the policy problem, distill the evidence, advise on solutions. And we actually know an awful lot about child poverty and child well-being already. We have a lot of history here in terms of designing solutions. We have a lot of evidence, much more research and evidence than we've ever had, in fact, in this country and internationally. We've evaluated programs that work. We are one of the wealthiest countries in the world, so we have resources, and yet we continue to experience significant challenges in terms of resolving some of these challenges. And why is that? Well, it's partially because creating outcomes in people's lives is a really complicated thing to do, and that there's lots of other things going on, and that as policymakers or service providers or community and voluntary sector organisations, we're not always in control of all those contexts, those things that we've talked about already today. Sometimes we are, sometimes we aren't, sometimes we see things coming, sometimes we don't. So there is this complexity in terms of outcomes. But it is reassuring, and I think I've been very inspired today about the work that's ongoing and the progress that we're making. And if you look at recent decades, we have made an awful lot of progress. And I suppose one of the roles of what we're trying to do is accelerate that and deepen that work. So I'm actually going to hand over to Anne-Marie now to tell us a little bit more about our work.
Thank you very much, Anna. So, just what is child poverty? And I'm really preaching to a group who completely know what it is based on your Slido inputs. Well, children are more likely to be in poverty than adults, and that's the case in a number of other countries and has been the case in Ireland for a long time. They're often the demographic group most likely to be in poverty, although sometimes older people are more likely to be in poverty, but usually children. Child poverty, as you all pointed out, is about so much more than money. It's about stigma, it's about lack of opportunities, it's about developmental delays, it's about homelessness, hunger. It's about so many more things than just money. It also travels across generations, as some of you pointed out. We know from studies in Ireland that adults who grew up who are in poverty are more likely to have grown up in families that were in poverty as well. We also know that certain groups of children are at much greater risk of being in poverty. For example, children in low-parent families, in families where there is a person with a disability, in families where someone is unemployed, traveller and Roma families. A lot of you mentioned education. It's a very, very strong linking factor across these families. Families with lower levels of education are more likely to be in poverty as well. It's situated in families and in communities. We know that disadvantaged communities where there's a stronger concentration of disadvantage has a kind of a multiplier effect on those families there. Not all poor children live in income-poor households. You know, they can suffer from deprivation even if the income is above average. But we do have an established and ambitious policy agenda to combat this in Ireland. We've had poverty proofing since the 90s. We've had a range of anti-poverty strategies. There is commitment in the Roadmap for Social Inclusion to reduce consistent poverty among children to 2%. And then in relation to children, we've had the National Children's Strategy, Better Outcomes, Brighter Futures, and now Young Ireland, which are about having better outcomes for all children, including children in poverty. So this graph shows you some of the kind of headline figures. I know Robin showed us a bit earlier. The red line in the middle is the one that we probably most often hear about, the at risk of poverty or relative poverty measure, which shows the percentage of children who live in households that have less than 60% of national median income. So if we look back from 2004 at the beginning of the chart, that figure has generally been coming down since then to 14.3% in the most recent figures. The green line then that is more volatile and goes up into a peak is deprivation figures. So that looks at the extent to which families can afford things like good food, clothing, shoes, furniture, ability to heat the house, ability to go out every so often and have people over. And if families are not able to afford more than 2 of these, they are deprived. So that figure is very responsive to recessions. It went way up from 2008 to 2013 and then started to decline. We can see it's been going up again recently as well. If you add the 2 of those together, you get the consistent poverty measure at the bottom, the blue line, and that's the children who are in the worst conditions, low income and deprivation, families who've spent all their resources or never had them to start with. This group is really the most disadvantaged. The figure for that is the lowest it has been in the last 20 years, which is super. But the latest figures do include some cost of living measures in the budgets and some COVID payments like the pandemic unemployment payment. So hopefully they'll stay down, but a bit of worry there in that. Poverty, as you are very well aware, has long-term consequences. Growing up in Ireland, studies looking at the same groups of children over time has shown that when those children are exposed to economic vulnerability, so that would be low income in the family, joblessness and kind of economic stress, paying bills or being in arrears with bills, that we have things like cognitive and educational attainment are lower, school engagement is lower, socio-emotional development is affected, children's own life satisfaction and concept of themselves is lower. And then there's a range of health impacts as well, higher chronic illness and disability, obesity, more likely to be smoking and drinking as well. And the quality of relations is impacted, and that comes back to something that Professor Abella talked about earlier. Are we trying to fix family problems when actually they're related to broader structural issues? So these are all problems from poverty, and they're made worse by repeated episodes of poverty. As we said earlier, those who experience poverty in childhood have an increased risk of experiencing it as adults, and there's a very strong link with education there because it impacts the kind of employment people can have. And this, the ESRI said, suggests the need for social policy to break the cycle of poverty, for example, by reducing persistent inequalities in educational outcomes from early childhood right through to higher education. So I will go back to Anna after this now. But just to say a little bit first about the benefits of reducing poverty, which you are so well aware of for individual children, also for reducing demands for social services, supporting a better economy because we're making sure that everybody can contribute to the best of their ability, supporting social cohesion, and also allowing children and adults to take part culturally and artistically as they should, and realising their potential. So we'll just move now to another Slido. So hopefully the technology will allow us to do that.
I need to duplicate the screens again.
Okay. Okay. So
It's to do with the settings.
1 second now.
So this question you can be thinking about it is something that I've been working out for the past 12 months or so. So what do you think the role of the centre of government is? What is the role of the Department of the Taoiseach? I mentioned earlier on the OECD has done some work on this. And it's something that I had previously been in a line department and I suppose had some engagement with the department, but it's something I think both Anne-Marie and I have been learning about over the last year. So curious as to what other impressions you might have of what it is, what is the function of something like an office in the Department of the Taoiseach. Plenty of people are typing, but not pressing send. Interesting. We're trying to work it out.
Give us an easier question.
Ammonia, yeah, well, that's true. Don't overthink it, Fergal. Let's leave it there for a second, because there's 14 participants typing, 18 in fact. So I really want to know what you're going to say. One of the things, I mentioned the work of the OECD in this space, and they've done several surveys of different governments to try and, I suppose, develop a framework about what the role is and how it's changing over time, because it certainly is changing. And one of the things that the OECD has talked about is the leadership role, and moving perhaps from as they categorize it, not my words now, Liz, this is the OECD, a kind of a command and control model to something which is more collaborative in terms of leadership. And I think the balance there is really interesting, and it's something that we've been exploring over the past 12 months in the experience of the Child Poverty and Wellbeing Unit.
Let me just check, it should be coming up.
And so it's that balance between having, I suppose, the power. Oh look, they were there all the time. Having the power to be quite directive in terms of the monitoring and accountability function that we play around holding other government departments to account. But on the other hand, what we're also trying to do is mobilise the cross-government response, energise it, accelerate it. And I suppose that's a slightly different task. So that idea of prioritisation and coordination, but also cajoling and encouraging people. So doing those two things at the same time, and I suppose that's where the title of this presentation came from. And there's an evolution there and a change, and it's something that we've been working with in various different ways. And I hope my colleagues from the line departments that are in the room see us as supportive. I know sometimes they may not experience it in that way, but we're all working to the same end. Do you want to just...
I see somebody typed "don't know," so that was kind of like us in the beginning as well, kind of going, what exactly can we do here? Okay.
So the OECD have come up with kind of eight functions for. And there is a report that people can look up if they're interested. And some of these have been really relevant to what we've been doing, and some have been a little bit less relevant, I suppose. And so we've been working through that, and also thinking through, given where we've come over the last year, what it is that we do moving forward. So I think some of them fall into the command and control kind of category, and those are things like ensuring high quality decision making across the system, how we're using the governance structures of senior officials groups and cabinet committees to make sure that quality is there and the evidence base is there, monitoring, lots of work around monitoring existing commitments. When we started to count the existing commitments in this space, I think we stopped reading at about 50 different government strategies. There's a lot of policy in this space, so the challenge is very often one of implementation rather than developing new policy. And we'll have a report later in the year, an annual report, which is looking at that monitoring piece specifically. There's also the idea of driving cross-cutting policy responses. So it's not necessarily policy advice, but rather taking that helicopter view. But I think sometimes the differentiation there isn't, you can move into a space where what we're trying to do is move forward around policy advice. And I think at times we've been quite interventionist, but I'm not sure I can tell you about those examples, so we'll leave that there. And also risk management and foresight is a key role. Now that's not something we've engaged in specifically, but it is definitely something that's a very important function of the department more generally. On the collaborative leadership side, that idea of bringing a broader vision, a broader whole of government vision, and I'll come back to that on some recent statements of the Taoiseach before we finish, but also we developed a programme plan last year, and we'll say a little bit more about that. But the idea of policy coordination across government and bringing that network together. Now, the network's incredibly important for us. Not only do we need to know who to ask the questions of, but also, as I said, what we're trying to do is drive implementation. So we really need the system to accept that it is taking on the responsibility around delivery. They also flag things like external and internal communications. I think we've done less of that, though I think the summit that we organised a couple of weeks ago took us into that space a little bit more, and particularly around the voice of the child and the importance of the voice of the child in this space, and that is something that we have we have been progressing. And managing transitions, again, not something that we're directly involved in, and I think, but it is more broadly a role. So I think the role of the Poverty Office really has tracked across a whole variety of different functions. And I said at the beginning, I think we exist because there wasn't somewhere else in the system that was delivering those things. So I'm going to ask Anne-Marie to talk a little bit more specifically about us and our role.
Thanks, Anna. So, as Anna said, last year we published our programme plan for the next 2.5 years, what we will work on. So there's two kind of key areas. One is monitoring the delivery of policy commitments by departments and agencies in 6 priority areas. And then the other is undertaking some strategic initiatives to increase the potential of current and emerging measures that government is working on. So the 6 priority areas that we've chosen to focus on for the first 2.5 years, first of all, there's income supports and joblessness, so to provide income supports and to help to address joblessness, which is obviously key for reducing poverty. Then also looking at how to support implementation of early learning and childcare programs. Then looking at reducing the cost of education, and also then looking at how to improve the situation of families who are homeless. Then we're going to look at consolidating and integrating services as well. There was some reference to that earlier. The services work better when they're integrated for both children and for adults. And finally, the final priority area is to enhance participation by disadvantaged children in culture, arts and sports, because that's one area where we can definitely see the kind of difference by social class. Then we have 4 cross-government initiatives. So one of these is a focus on child poverty in the annual budget, and that's something that a lot of other countries who've tried to address child poverty have focused on as well, because obviously the annual budget is a key area where the government lays out its spending for the year. So it does give, some possibility to change things. But of course, a lot of funding in a budget is kind of rolled over funding. There isn't always a lot of new funding in a budget. The second thing then is a programme to support service integration. So we've been doing work with other departments and agencies who are looking at how to integrate services better and at the kind of the best examples that there are out there to help us to develop a framework on that. Then we have been looking at tools that can enhance policy and implementation focus. So that would be working with agencies and departments who are looking at how budgets are spent, at equality budgeting, at poverty proofing. There's some local area pilot programs going on to look at child poverty and how to address it as well. And then a final area of work is looking at the workforce for child services and how to develop that. So there's some specifics there, like trying to have a public health nurse cohort that looks specifically at children and supports children specifically. But then there's a wider issue across other child services like OT and speech and language therapy, early learning and childcare. There's a lot of areas that find it difficult to recruit enough staff in that.
So one of the questions we got when the new, because obviously it was Leo Varadkar who announced the establishment of the Child Poverty and Wellbeing Office. So when the new Taoiseach came along, one of my colleagues stuck his head around my door and said, "Oh, are you guys still here?" And we are very much still here. And I think this is a quote from Taoiseach Simon Harris at the National Economic Dialogue a couple of weeks ago, when he really contextualised the challenge around child poverty and well-being as part of a broader vision for society. But what he did say was that this will be Ireland's moonshot, if you will, and it will be a guiding focus for everything I do. So no pressure there then. But there is this political ambition around child poverty and well-being at the moment, and I think that's an opportunity for all of us who are working in this space to take that and think about, well, what does it mean for all the different parts of the system that we've talked about. So we wanted to take that idea of moonshot over the last couple of minutes and just pull out maybe a few key themes that we're thinking about in terms of our learning over the last year or so. And so we'll be brief, I promise. We're not going to go all the way to the moon, but just in terms of the things that we think have been important and will potentially continue to be important over the next little while.
Okay, so the first thing is that this is just very comprehensive. So you've already got some idea of that because there's so many policy areas that we're working on and so many different organisations that we're working with. And I suppose that's kind of the essence of being in centre of government. It is about drawing together all those different policy areas, looking at the commonalities across them, looking at how we can, make them all gel together better and have better outcomes. So the monitoring that the Child Poverty and Wellbeing Office is going to do of those 50 programmes and policies is going to look at, what are the commonalities across those areas and could we kind of work on those together? Is there some cross-cutting work that can be done across departments? Because that's something that a centre of government department and unit can do that other departments maybe can't do. Although, of course, there are limits, on what we can do. And that comes to the second thing, which is about how our work is collaborative. So it's all about working with other organisations, other departments and other agencies. And even just to think about the work that we're doing at the moment in relation to what the budget can do on child poverty. Like there's already existing processes and organisations. Each department works on their own budget. They work with DPER. There's the politicians as well. So there's an awful lot of collaborative work that we need to do with them to see what suggestions can we make and where can they go. And there's a lot of interesting things about what the boundaries are between the work of the different organisations. And if you want to do something a bit new, how do you work with the existing processes and organisations? And I'm not always sure. And then, it can be complicated as well. So there are competing priorities in government. Everybody wants everything, and we can't do everything. So how do you balance, the need to address child poverty with the need to have a good economy, even within departments like colleagues in the Department of Children have spoken about, they need to spend on integration, on early learning and childcare, on the National Childcare Scheme. They want to spend on family supports and on parenting. And how do you make the arguments for how important all of those are? And that's just in one department. So what happens then when it comes across a whole range of departments? So there isn't really easy solutions. And, we've picked 6 priority areas, but we could have picked 6 others. Yeah, it's a very interesting space. The collaboration is great, the comprehensiveness is great, but it is complicated.
One of the things, as I've said, when we're bringing people together in terms of convening them and this sense that we absolutely need everybody across the system, in government and outside of government, working together to deliver this. That comes with a lot of responsibility, I suppose, in terms of our convening role. And when we bring people into the room, we're really hoping that that will be an opportunity for reflection and learning, but also that they will leave the room more energized in terms of the work that we're doing. So bringing that kind of a little bit of innovation and imagination to it, not to overtalk that, but it's that sense of creating an energy across the system. And so we've done that through the establishment of a cross-government network, but also hopefully some of you were at our summit a couple of weeks ago, and it really was trying to create that sense of urgency and energy to give value, if you will, to the convening function. And that's important. I think Gordon Brown referenced it when he spoke at the summit a couple of weeks ago, when he referenced that story from Nassau about, the cleaner was asked, well, what are you doing? What's your job? And they said, well, I'm putting someone on the moon. So it's that really strong sense of the collective agenda and how we can help to support that. And I already talked a little bit about command and control and more collaborative forms of leadership. But I suppose it's our job to reinforce that message that the stakes are really, really high here, and the Taoiseach wants a job done, right? So, so it's reminding the system, if you will, that that is the opportunity that we faced. William Anders, I think, died last weekend, I heard on the news. He was flying, at the age of 91, flying a plane solo. He's the guy who took that photo of the Earth rising from the moon. And I love this quote from him. He talks about, you know, we went all the way to explore the moon, and actually the most important thing we discovered was the Earth. And that photo is really credited with changing mindsets in terms of thinking about things like the environmental movement and thinking about the value of the Earth. So here's a picture from the summit about, and it's a group of kids who performed a song from Music Generation. And it was really strong moment in terms of what they were able to bring into the room. And again, speaks to what everybody's already been saying today, that it's really important that that voice is there in a way that is genuinely participative, involved, and directive as well, that it has impact. So Mary Robinson reminded the Seanad yesterday when she was in talking about the climate crisis. She said, as Nelson Mandela said, it always seems impossible until it's done. Thank you very much.